Okay, so a quick overview of that. Agents, they're more autonomous relative to assistants, suitable for complicated tasks, more goal-oriented. So an example of those, self-driving cars, stock trading bots, security systems, those all require very little, if any, human intervention. Assistants, they're more reactive, less autonomous, suitable for simple tasks, and user focus. So examples are chatbots, such as customer service agents, even though they're called agents, they're not really. And then coding assistants like Copilot, Alexa, and Siri can be used as an assistant, or they can be both. Uh, so an example of that, if you were to ask Alexa, like, what's the weather? That's more of an assistant thing. You give it an input, you want an output. Where it borders on being an agent is where you say, like, order more bananas. It has to go on Amazon, pick out bananas, put it in your shopping cart, do the checkout process, use your default payment method, things like that. So it's a much more complicated task. And something like that could be automated if you said, like, um, once a month, order bananas, and then puts it on a schedule and everything's automated. Chatbots like GPT, if you ask it to do a deep research. So as an example, I said, what's the difference between LC mass spec and GC mass spec? It uses an agentic system to uh, scrape the web for sources, extract information, compile a report. It's just a long automated process that ideally, I think it wants to take the place of research, but the effectiveness of that is debatable. So a little bit of background about the protocol analyzer. So data scientists at EMSL were tasked with designing a database model around different experiments. We got lab protocols from the scientists, usually written in Microsoft Word, um, handwritten notes, or even from larger publications. So like 100-page PDFs, there might be one page dedicated to a protocol. We have to find those, extract the steps, gather the list of materials, instruments, measurements. So essentially, we had to build a strict relational database around these handwritten lab notes. The variables had to be modeled in the database. So for future experiments, we could record those. Whenever a new protocol was adopted, we had to change the database, add tables, um, update all kinds of stuff. And the whole process for that took several weeks. Uh, a little bit of in-depth explanation of that is we took a lab protocol, it goes to a developer. They typically pick out the different variables and measurements and what they think is important. You collaborate with scientists to figure out um, maybe what kind of instruments that we have to use, um, and what's the best judgment call. So, like, if you have a step in your protocol that says, like, freeze sample at X degrees. Is that a storage step or is that considered a incubation step? So stuff like that. You have to make those judgment calls. So that whole process goes around in a circle for 4 to 6 weeks. Once we come up with a model that everybody agrees on, we finally code it and put it into the database. So we were thinking, how can AI help this process? Since the general process was the same for every protocol. We have a lab protocol, we discuss it for several weeks, and then it becomes a database model. So if we could offload this to an LLM, especially one that's trained on various types of science, such as GPT-4, we could give a lab protocol to the protocol analyzer. It converses with GPT. It has instructions and training data. It takes roughly 30 seconds to get a response. The developer looks it over. We consult with a scientist roughly an hour to make sure everything looks good, and it goes into the database. So we're essentially taking 4 to 6 weeks down to about an hour. So there's two modules to the protocol analyzer. One's the JSON extractor, which was our initial goal. Basically, it extracts variables from the protocol, creates a structured JSON file. This can be used for later use. You can use it in scripts, but most importantly, it's a universal format. And then there's the database modeler, which we kind of wanted to take one step further and see if it could take our existing database and automate those improvements. So we essentially don't really have to code anything. We just, check some boxes that says this looks good. Let's test it. So it uses that JSON output as well as looking at your existing database model, handles most of the coding, offers suggestions, commentary, and it's most importantly, it's specific to your database. And I'll give some examples of that as we go on. So this is the interface. Uh, there's there's two modules. There's the front end interface, and then there's the command line interface, which I'll go through after that, and you can kind of see how works behind the scenes. But essentially, you'll upload your protocol. Could be a text file. If you add something like OCR, you could upload PDFs. You know, just about anything where the protocol is written. It'll populate in the text box. There's an advanced button where you could enter a small command. In testing, we said translate this protocol to Spanish. It worked just fine. Um, so you click begin. So you have the protocol. In this case, the test protocol was Shimatsu protocol. You can see it's kind of plain text, gives the steps, thaw samples in a shaker, 30 degrees, microbial biomass samples, shake at 200 RPMs for 2 hours. There's a lot of variables to extract there. The temperature, the fact that we're using a shaker, it's a thaw step. You have your RPMs, you have your time limit. So how can we all put that into a structured format? Secondly is we give our database schema, which in this case is SQL Alchemy, a model that says we have for example, a table called sample processing. We have these different columns that we need to put data in, the steps, the duration, temperature, notes, when it was processed. And this is before we added the Shimatsu protocol. So this is what the database would look like. We want it to offer suggestions on improving that model using the data from the protocol. So we give it takes a minute to process. Depending on your model, if you have like GPT 404, it's probably going to take a long time. But the older models that are less accurate would be a lot faster. So the result is that we have a suggested uh, table, which is sample details. And digging more into that, we can see that it created sample details. It suggested, vial volume, dilution factor, paired sample, all of these different things. It gave a comment on why it added those. It chose the correct data type. So we basically look that over. We test it. If it works, then we can use it. So just kind of a summary here. And there's the back end and front end. I showed you the front end, which is the database modeler. Next will be the back end using just the JSON extractor. So you can kind of see what that raw data looks like. So on the back end, we have our example protocol, the Shimatsu protocol. We have a folder of training data. And for training data, we have like instructions, which is just like system prompts. If you've heard of prompt engineering, that's basically all that is. We have example protocols and protocol outputs on what we think the JSON should look like. We feed all those to the language model as examples. We also give it a target schema, which is target schema validated. It's a empty JSON and basically says extract the data, put it into an output that matches this schema. This is how we want it to look. So there's a lot of very like you're telling it exactly what you want, but there are some judgment calls that it has to make that I'll go over in a little bit. Oh, actually, right here. So uh, in the target schema validated, we basically say uh, we need to choose an activity type for each step. So we have like an acidification step, centrifuge, is it drying, is it rinsing, you know, and the model has to look at the step and decide which of these would be suitable. And that's really the most important part that requires a model that's trained on scientific data. So it knows like if it's on a vortex, is that mixing or is that a phase separation or what kind of step is that? And then we have like the metadata properties that it pulls out. So that's pretty straightforward. On the command line, we basically run a simple Python, the script name, and then the protocol that you feed it. It saves the response as JSON. Pretty straightforward. This is something you could automate in other Python scripts. You can see that it took the Shimatsu, and so like the orange arrows, the metadata, it picked out what it could. Um, it actually detected that lines through 2 through 5 are actually steps. So step one isn't thaw samples. It said step one is the preparation step, detected it as a solution, and gave the quantities and the materials that it needed. So, and it just went down through the steps and populated these structured outputs. So that would be an assistant look at it where the interface, you have to upload a file, you have to click these buttons. An agentic approach would be how can we automate this? So, like a bot says, how can I help you? User says, process these 30 protocols in Protocol Analyzer using the default schema and send me a zip file of the final JSON outputs. The bot might say, gladly, please wait while I send these protocols to the agent. It does a bunch of processing and then gives you the zip file. That would be a good agentic approach to it. So just a summary, agents versus assistants, complex functions for agents, more user-focused, more human intervention for assistants. The protocol analyzer was developed at EMSL as a tool to convert lab protocols into database schemas. It reduced the processing time from 4 to 6 weeks to about 1 hour. And the PA is an assistant that can be made into an agent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. We already have a question from the audience.
Thank you for the presentation. So it was not so clear for me if you can talk a little bit more about the input. The input is the scope, or you also provide the functionalities that the analyzer had to consider?
Yeah, so the input is, let me try to go back to a few slides here. Uh, uh, when we do an input, it's strictly the protocol itself. As far as parameters go, it really depends on your model. So like GPT doesn't have a lot of customization, especially for, I'm not sure if I fully understand your question, but it sounds like you're talking about parameters to run the actual model. But yeah, it really depends on the model if that's what you're talking about. So GPT has some customization that you can do, but for this specifically, we just give it the model, and These are the protocol, and these protocols are all specific to EMSL experiments. So the training data is all EMSL experiments. If you were to customize it and use it for another purpose, of course, you would change the training data appropriately.
Okay, and so the output, sorry, and the outputs are the schemas. Are the schemas already normalized?
Yeah, so the end schema, like the JSON schema, this is something that we've already developed and agreed upon at the lab that this is what we want to use. So everything here is pre-written, but it's all customizable if you wanted to change it, and then it would just refer to that as kind of the template.
Thank you. Last question. So we get the metadata indicating what are the dependencies, the functional dependencies that the attribute has, and the connection between the schemas?
Um, I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
So we can have more than one schema, right?
Yeah, you could have more than one schema, but you would have to tell it which one you want it to use as another parameter. So it's a little bit more coding work to do that.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We have another question in the audience.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Um, I wanted to ask you because I didn't understand very well what's the output. I mean, I understood like it was a schema, but how that's interpreted? Like, how can I interpret that, and what's the function of having this schema?
Yeah, so it started out as a use case just for EMSL. So uh, we have a data portal that users can go to download a lot of this experiment data. And the data portals, the database is modeled after the experiments we do in the lab, which means we have these protocols and we need to design this database where the columns are capturing the proper data that the data gives us. So this is basically taking those protocols and telling us how we should model the database and what data is worth recording eventually so the users can download it. Does that kind of answer your question? The output for this is the actual code to create the database.
Okay, thank you. And one more question: is there any viable protocol analyzer that we can use?
We're in the process of getting it released for public use. There will be a public GitHub that you can go to and download it and try it out. The only thing that we don't give out is the API key because as you use it, it costs money. So you would have to have like a GPT account or an OpenAI account, and then you enter your own API key that they give you, and then you could use it. So that'll be coming out probably later this year.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I just want to add a little bit to that because I was also on this project with James. When we say that this is going to come out later, it's the functionality. It won't be the code for you to reuse in your own way. But I did notice in the chat that someone mentioned that they built a similar sounding lab shopping assistant called ProtoCart. And that sounds like an interesting similar thing to check out. Okay, another question online. If your protocol is vague, can the protocol analyzer come back with a clarifying question like, is this a protein precipitation step using a word that I don't know? or something like that. I imagine that's a design choice.
Yeah, that's definitely a design choice. So this project we had very limited time. So we wanted to get just a functional baseline thing done that we could present and use. But you could definitely add some interaction there. Again, clarifying questions kind of remove the automation aspect. So you kind of got to weigh the importance of agent versus assistant. But GPT does a really good job, especially if in the instructions you tell it, um, if you don't have a 95% confidence on the answer, come back and ask me clarifying questions, and it will do that. It does a great job of that. So that's something you could build into it for sure.
Great, thank you. I think I've already answered a few of these questions, like, is the protocol analyzer developed by EMSL available to the public? And no, not yet, but the functionality will be.
Yep.
So another question, what are the downstream applications for the database schema? And are there potential applications for automation here?
Yeah, the use case we have is just to model the data portal, but anything you can think of for using that data, we have a LIMS system that which is lab information management system, and where scientists will go to kind of keep track of their experiments, each step and each type of analysis would go in there, and each type of analysis is a workflow that they have to create. And we thought about using this to take the lab protocols and developing a workflow because the LIMS system that we have uses LinkML to create the workflows. So we could get this to convert instead of JSON, tell it to output as LinkML. Then we could import that into the LIMS system and automate that workflow process, which currently takes us several weeks to do. So that's another application. So with a little creativity, you can think of some use cases for it.
Do you mind explaining what LinkML is and how that's different from what we've used here?
Yeah, I don't recall what it stands for, but it's kind of, if you think of JSON without all of the extra characters, it's a very straightforward way to display structured data. Wish I had an example, but yeah, just Google LinkML example and you can see what it looks like. It's just text. Linked data modeling language. Thank you, Montana. Yep. And a lot of people use that to model their databases as well.
Great, thank you. So is the data recording process separate from the protocol analyzer? And are there agents that could be utilized to help facilitate that?
The data recording process, it sounds like you're talking about the part where it takes in the protocol data and outputs the variables like in a JSON format. You could absolutely, if you have like 1,000 protocols that you want to analyze, you could split it off into jobs and do um, multiple calls to GPT at the same time. You could try that for sure.
Okay, thank you. Another online question. Do you mind explaining again, what is the goal with the protocol? Just getting an online version of a protocol, or what is achieved there?
Yeah, so the goal there is to, like, we have this database and it records information from some kind of block of text. So you have a protocol which is the block of text and it contains all kinds of variables, and you want to take those variables and you want to um, create some kind of structured output that can be reused over and over again. So if every time the lab scientist runs an experiment, they typically would use the same protocol. So therefore, they would have a recording of temperature, a recording of time, the amount of some kind of material, and that would get recorded at the end of the experiment. But what do you do with that data when you have, all of your results data? It has to go into some kind of database so people looking back at your experiment can see exactly what you did, what you measured, what different results there were, and like comments or notes that you have. This develops, this takes that lab protocol and develops the database required to store that information. So if you think of like an Excel sheet, you have columns and the header names on those columns are the different variables. So you might have a column called temperature, and then each row is an experiment that you did, and you have to record the temperature for that. That's kind of it's creating that Excel template that you're going to use to record future experiments.
Thank you. I'm pretty sure this next question is for you. Should we start encouraging grad students and postdocs to learn about using agents in scientific fields? Do you think more people right now could benefit from finding the right AI agent for their work? Or do you think the cost of the AI, including agents, should be covered by their department?
I think it depends on the use case. If you're doing a research project at an institution and you feel that using an agent could help that research in some way, explain it to your PI and say, I think this is how it's going to benefit us. This is how much time it could potentially save, and I think we should fund that. Uh, I think that's a great approach. But if you're using it to like aid your own work, like that's a topic here at the lab that we're talking about. Like, can programmers use the programming assistant to help their programming? Should they cover that cost, or should the lab cover that cost? It's kind of a debate there, but by all means, agents are getting cheaper as we go. This entire project, through 9 months of testing, only cost us $6 in compute for OpenAI. So it's cheap, and it's getting cheaper and it's getting more powerful, more useful. So definitely make that argument that, I think we should fund using this agentic system because this is how it can help us and save us time and money.
Great, thank you. And I just want to add to that we use this proprietary model, so there is this ongoing cost, and it would have been significantly more expensive if we continued fine-tuning.
Hmm.
We found very quickly that that was too expensive for this project,
Yeah.
and that also you don't necessarily need to use a proprietary model because they do have those ongoing costs. You could use open source models, but then you would have to host and set that up, and that's a little bit more of a heavy lift. But if
Yeah.
you are budget conscious, then that is an option.
Yep.
I think we have time for a few more questions, and then we can take a 15-minute break. So let's look at a few more online ones. How else, we might have answered this, but let's go over it again. How else can you use the protocol database and protocol assistant besides providing users with info about their protocol?
So I think the big question there is who's using this. It's going to be developers using the actual protocol assistant, and developers are going to use that to make life easier when modeling a database. The users themselves that are accessing the data, like researchers at different labs, they're not going to interact with Protocol Analyzer at all. So this is all behind the scenes. So if you're a software engineer or a database architect, you might use this software. But yeah, the goal isn't to give users their own data, but rather create a system that can be used to accurately record all of this data.
so that we can then upload the EMSL user data more quickly, right?
Yeah.
Just clarifying their EMSL user, but then there's also just a user internally of this project.
Yep.
And Jeremy is mentioning, have you checked out XDL and Computer? And there is a link in the chat that translates lab protocols to XDL, which enables laboratory automation. Have you ever heard of that, James?
No, I haven't. That'd be good to look at. I know there's a lot of agents, even at EMSL or at PNNL, where you could take plain text and convert it to some kind of structured output. That's pretty popular right now. Um, and I think the goal with this is the specific use cases. So do you want it to be broad and used, just take a block of any kind of text and output some cool stuff, like you could use it like that, but the real use comes with how you use it for your specific case and how much time can it save you. I haven't checked out XDL or Computer, but I'd be interested to look at that.
Great. Well, add that to the list. Thanks, Jeremy. Probably the last question we'll get around to today. Can the protocol analyzer you just showed be used for every lab protocol? Please give more insights there.
Yeah, that really comes down to the effectiveness of your model. So there's the validation schema that I showed, and that basically says what you want the output to look like. So if it's able to read the protocol and sort of fill in those blanks, then it could be used. But without a validation schema, if you don't care what the output looks like, it could absolutely read any sort of protocol. If you gave it, I think we tried a few times to give it like a blank file, or I gave it some kind of novel that had nothing to do with science. It could try its best to spit something out, but it might come back and say, this doesn't look like a protocol, which is one of the things we accounted for. It will throw an error that says it can't read the protocol. But that's really the effectiveness of your model. GPT is really good at that. Some other smaller models, maybe like Llama 7B, is less effective at that and, less trustworthy.
All right, one final question here in the room.
I mean, most of my questions have been answered, but I was just thinking about the fact that is there a way the protocol analyzer can actually give like a workflow, like something like instead of just giving the JSON schema, maybe, some people are very visual appealing, so something like just like a workflow of from step 1 to step 2, something like that. So instead of just like getting like a PDF or JSON schema file of that, you just have like a graphical representation of that as well. Maybe that would make people to just kind of just get the workflow and then copy it maybe in PowerPoint presentation or something like that. So
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the cool things about LLMs in general is their ability to interpret what you want in your instructions. So our instructions are very specific about what we want our output to look like. So, but if you edited those to say like, here's an example of what I think this workflow should look like, given some kind of protocol, and just kind of give it an example to steer it. It'll do a great job of giving you that. So like if you want to take the steps and clean them up, maybe translate those to different terms for different audiences, maybe translate it to a different language, and then give us those steps. in like an Excel file or, something else, then you could definitely do that. It's all about the system instructions that you give it.
Thank you, James. One quick final question from the audience, then we'll take a break.
Hello. So I have a question about workflow. So as I understood, there is always a human in the loop in that kind of workflow. Is that correct?
Yeah. So in the protocol analyzer sense, the developer works with the tool specifically, and then when it gets an output that the developer thinks looks good, you consult with the scientist to make sure everything is scientifically accurate. So there's at least two humans in the loop.
Okay. Is there a way like to minimize the presence of humans in the loop?
Yeah, that kind of depends on the sophistication of your code and how much you trust your model. So you could potentially edit the instructions with Protocol Analyzer and say, check this over multiple times. Maybe check it with other models that aren't GPT. Maybe you want it to check multiples and then kind of get a consensus. There's the idea of using personas, which where you tell an AI, you play the role of a scientist. Maybe you play the role of a chemist, and then you have another model that says you play the role of um, a biologist, and you guys want to collaborate and check over this protocol or this JSON, make sure it all looks scientifically accurate before sending it off. And then you might have better results that way. You probably certainly will, but and then do you trust it to go into a database for public consumption without human intervention? I think that's a big trial and error thing that would require a lot of testing, but that is definitely something you could do.
Thank you.